can run on for a long time, run on for a long time, run on for a long time. Sooner or later gotta cut you down, sooner or later gotta cut you down.
A symbol is anything that is agreed upon to designate something else. The advantage of symbols is that they may communicate complex concepts while being simple in and of themselves. Most symbols are simple drawings that consist of a few pen strokes, while other symbols are objects or actions. The diamond on a wedding ring, for instance, is a symbol. Imagine all the things that can be inferred about a husband who gives his wife a wedding ring mounted with a piece of glass or a random pebble instead of a diamond. An apple is just a fruit, and yet has been commonly associated with education, wisdom, and teachers. A wink is an action, but also a symbol. It is often used to communicate sexual interest, or to convey a hint. The symbol, whether it's a drawing, action, or object, often conveys a message far more complex than the symbol itself. The foundation of all symbols is agreement. When a symbol is repeatedly used in the same context, agreement regarding that symbol's meaning is formed. As time progresses, the symbol's meaning solidifies. If symbols are used randomly, with constantly changing meanings and associations, they fail to be symbols at all. After all, what good is a symbol that means something different each and every time you see it? Illuminati symbolism, used in popular culture such as movies, novels, and TV shows, isn't used randomly either. Believing that all-seeing eyes, pyramids, and suns are inserted into random places in a movie is an easy mistake to make. But let's think about that. Let me take you to a backward universe where the meaning of symbols is arbitrary and random. A world where hospital signs lead to fire stations and elementary schools. A world where the play and pause symbols have no bearing on what the buttons actually do. A world where radiation signs, biohazard symbols, don't walk signs, and dollar signs are placed randomly throughout the city and used interchangeably. You get the idea. If used randomly and without repeating context, the symbol fails to be a symbol at all. We don't use symbols randomly, we can't afford to, and neither can the Illuminati. The Illuminati is more dependent on symbols than most, and the reason is that it allows for secure communication no matter where the messages are located. As long as the masses are kept outside of that symbol's agreed upon meaning, any message can be hidden in plain sight. And, as stated earlier, not all symbols are drawings. This is so important to remember as we move forward. The Illuminati share a tradition similar to how Christians, Muslims, and Hindus share a tradition. Compared to the overall population, Christians, for example, share similar beliefs on the origin and history of man, the major cosmic players like Jesus, God, and Satan, and what is moral and immoral. The Hindus share a story with hundreds of gods and general consensus regarding their respective histories, duties, personalities, and relationships. If Hindus insisted on telling stories from their traditions and embedding that tradition into their works of fiction, a repeating story would slowly emerge. These quote-unquote fictional retellings would of course be quickly discovered if each retelling is placed in the same context, but if each retelling contains variations of settings, characters, genders, time frames, and even villains and heroes, it will appear, at least from afar, that they've simply run out of original ideas. Imagine retelling the story of the world nations during the 20th century in the context of a high school classroom, where individual students would represent countries. Telling the story of the world nations from the year 1900 to 2000, all in terms of high school students. Geopolitics of the 20th century meets Saved by the Bell. Students become popular, powerful, rise, and fall. The character representing America would be isolationist and weak at first, and finish intrusive and powerful. The Russian would start weak, have a moment of glory mid-season, and by the end descend once more into mediocrity. And, needless to say, the blonde German kid starts not one, but two huge fights that leave the classroom in shambles. All retellings have three things: characters, in this case major world nations; context, in this case high school students in a classroom; and a timeline, in this case the years 1900 to 2000. Now imagine the very same story of nations told in terms of the African savanna, America the eagle, Russia the bear, etc. Geopolitics meets the Lion King. After hundreds of these retellings, even with altered characters, contexts, and timelines, eventually two retellings will resemble each other so much that they will betray the original story from which they were founded. Even the various religions and mythologies appear to be nothing more than retellings of a singular, root story. Here's food for thought. It's been noticed that many gods in Egyptian mythology have apparent counterparts in Greek, Persian, and Roman mythology, the same characters appearing over and over again in different religions. We commonly come to the faulty conclusion that one mythology and all its stories were absorbed by another mythology, who gave the gods different names. Essentially, a religious ripoff. But that doesn't hold true for the Bible. The Bible has always been thought of as distant from Greek and Egyptian mythologies. Themes involving angels and demons, heaven and hell, God and Satan have never been merged with the gods and titans of ancient Greece. But listen to this Bible verse. Here's Revelation, chapter 9, verse 11. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. This passage is in reference to an angel that arrives from the bottomless pit, or hell basically, and rules over countless demons. And what the passage is saying is that this angel has names in other mythologies: Abaddon for the Jews, and Apollyon for the Greeks. Apollyon is what the ancient Greeks called Apollo, the sun god of Greek mythology. The Bible is basically suggesting that the character Apollo from Greek mythology is a very real character, leads an army of demons, and has alternate names in other religions. And it doesn't end there at all. Almost all of the religions and mythologies contain at least one sun god. The Illuminati only retell one kind of story, the story of the quote-unquote gods. Angels and demons to some, aliens to others, and the gods to the rest. Because of this, the ones writing these stories in modern times are in some ways limited. Because their story is actually based on another story, the gods, they can only add in so much variation. If the retelling adds in too much variation, it will no longer resemble the original story. So how do they manage thousands of accurate and semi-accurate retellings, all while you're unaware? Symbols. Symbols are the key. And this is exactly why they, like us, can't afford to abuse them. Without their extensive collection of symbols, they would be unable to retell the same story in novels, movies, TV shows, and even music, and conceal this fact for centuries. The Illuminati are often accused of sun worship, but this is absurd. They have no interest in the ball of fire that traverses our sky. Their only interest is in the god or character that the sun symbol represents. So if you think that this eye or that pyramid is in a random place, think again. Never forget, it's only a symbol, and they can't afford to abuse it. What's the bottom line? While you're watching Saved by the Bell, they see the story of the nations, because they know the symbols. While you're watching The Lion King, they again see the story of the nations, because they know the symbols. With their countless symbols, insiders inform other insiders which character is which, relative to the Illuminati's tradition. The Illuminati share detailed information on demons, spirits, angels, and aliens, beings who we, throughout the ages, have called the gods. But most importantly, they share detailed information regarding individual archangels and demons. This tradition also includes their respective histories with each other, personalities, agendas, abilities, lineages, and loyalties. To them, characters like Satan or Archangel Michael or Gabriel, for instance, are not distant and abstract, like they are to Christians, who are given very limited knowledge regarding these individuals. To the Illuminati, these characters are as tangible as politicians or celebrities are to us. Each of these gods has their own history, personalities, etc. But by lining up multiple retellings of these very same characters, and discovering the parts where they all agree, outsiders like us are capable of reconstructing bits and pieces of the Illuminati's inner teachings. And since the beginning of this documentary series, that's exactly what I've attempted to do. This documentary is, for all intents and purposes, the sequel to Hollywood Insider's Full Disclosure, and could have easily been called Full Disclosure 2. Of course, only quote-unquote Hollywood insiders, forgive the expression, are writing these kinds of retellings. So naturally, you'll find repeating themes in stories written by a particular insider, but also a repeating theme occurring in the stories of several writers. Each writer, being bound to a single root story, the gods, can only change the point of view, context, and timeline. Further, it's okay if a different author writes a script for a sequel of a movie. Using the context and characters the first writer decided on, the new writer is likely to write the sequel similar to how the first writer would have. The sequel will be nothing more than the next segment in the timeline, using the same characters, context, and settings the first movie used. Sometimes in movies, things are said, or jokes are told, that seem to make no sense. It may have been a scene or joke intended to be understood only by the illuminated. Some jokes just aren't funny, and some scenes just don't make sense unless you're familiar with the symbols and the root story. If a certain writer in Hollywood writes an insider's retelling, it's altogether likely that much, if not all, of their other stories are retellings too. In this documentary, I'll be reviewing many of the movies that were discussed in Full Disclosure, but instead following the career of those Hollywood storytellers. Once again, it all starts with this movie, The Man Who Would Be King. The Man Who Would Be King was released in 1975 and stars Sean Connery and Michael Caine. It's a film about two Englishmen who hatch a plan to travel to a primitive nation and steal its wealth by claiming to be divine beings. They arrive and are initially met with hostility, but are mistaken for gods by the particular natives they encountered first. They become the immediate leaders of this tribe, and would lead the tribe to victory after victory as Danny sets out to conquer all the surrounding tribes. But before his military victories are complete, Danny, played by Sean Connery, is discovered wearing a charm adorned with the Masonic compass and all-seeing eye, and the remaining people, still unconvinced of his divinity, become believers. Apparently, there was a prophecy among the natives regarding the arrival of a man with such a mark. All the nations unite under his leadership, and he comes to rule the entire land for a brief time. Slowly, Danny starts to forget about his original intentions to get the Golden Run, and decides to stay and take a wife, and remain as leader, while Peachy, played by Michael Caine, decides to take his half of the gold and some soldiers and go home. But before Peachy can leave, Danny is bitten at his wedding and revealed to be only human after he's seen bleeding. During their escape, their gold is wasted, and after a small fight, they are captured and punished. The short story that the movie is based on was written by a member of the Illuminati named Rudyard Kipling more than a century ago, and since the movie's release in 1975, this movie's storyline and concepts have been reused by other Illuminati insiders in Hollywood. A detailed comparison of The Man Who Would Be King and these other movies can be found in Hollywood Insider's Full Disclosure. In this film, I'll simply summarize those comparisons. From the outside, which is the same as not being familiar with the symbols, it appears that the following movies are blatant rip-offs of The Man Who Would Be King and each other. But maybe that's not what's happening. Maybe what's happening is that The Man Who Would Be King, many of the following movies, and countless others, are all based on the same root story, and because of it, simply appear to rip off of each other. Our first offender is Roland Emmerich. Roland Emmerich is a German, born in 1955, openly gay, an art collector, big surprise, but most importantly, he's a pathetic excuse for a writer. Roland directed and in many cases produced and wrote the stories from movies like Independence Day, Stargate, Godzilla, The Day After Tomorrow, 10,000 BC, 2012, and a few other crappy movies. His retelling of The Man Who Would Be King, or the most obvious one, was Stargate. Stargate is about a portal that's been lying in the sands of the Egyptian desert for ages. The portal was discovered by an excavation team and decades later was activated. The portal, once activated, opened a gate to a planet on the other side of the universe. The group chosen to walk through the Stargate consisted of a small special forces squad and an Egyptologist named Danny. Similar to Danny from The Man Who Would Be King, Danny from Stargate is given a charm with an all-seeing eye on it just before departure. After walking through the Stargate, they arrive to a primitive land, whose locals take notice of Danny's amulet and mistake him for a divine being. After a series of events where most of the soldiers are killed, the local people all unite under the leadership of Danny and the remaining soldiers. Eventually, the sun god Ra, the antagonist of the movie, is killed by Danny and Jack. Afterwards, Daniel decides to stay and take a local for a wife, rather than going home through the Stargate with Jack and the remaining soldiers. There are even some scenes in the movie that appear to deliberately draw from The Man Who Would Be King. The second major movie that Roland wrote was Independence Day. Released in 1996, Independence Day, or ID4 as the advertising campaign would come to call it, was a huge hit. Its major draw, like all of Emmerich's movies, was its action and special effects scenes. The script itself was poorly written. In the movie, an alien sneak attack leaves humanity retreating on all sides. A sense of hopelessness sets in as more counterattacks fail. Finally, it falls upon two men to deliver a computer virus to the aliens' mothership in space. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the human race is forming a global command structure in order to engage the aliens in a unified way. This global command, led by the American president naturally, finds the aliens' weakness and brings a screeching halt to the alien invasion. The Day After Tomorrow, released in 2004, was everything we've come to expect from Roland Emmerich. Stale characters, bad dialogue, factual inaccuracies, and needlessly long. The Day After Tomorrow is about a series of disasters that have been triggered by global warming. The first indication that this was a bad movie, aside from Dennis Quaid, is NASA's answer to Roland Emmerich's request that they do scientific consultation for his new film.
What's NASA have to say?
NASA said for your people to stop calling their people. Apparently, Roland asked NASA to, give him a few pointers regarding making his movie more scientifically accurate. Evidently, not even an army of rocket scientists could bridge the gap between Emmerich's newest film and scientific reality. NASA, who has always pushed the global warming story, declined to have their four little letters associated with the movie in any way. Why, you ask? The film contains scenes and scenarios that would make even Al Gore blush. Giant hurricane ice storms that can freeze anything in seconds, tornadoes in LA, blizzards in India, all caused by global warming, somehow.
Excuse me, when do you think this could happen, Professor? When?
I don't know. Maybe in 100 years, maybe in 1,000, but what I...
You heard him, folks. This global warming thing can kick in anytime. 1,000 years from now, 100 years from now, or even the day after tomorrow. A mere 2 days after Mr. Quaid's stirring address to the nations regarding long-term climate change, the laws of thermodynamics go on vacation. So much so that The Day After Tomorrow has found itself on more than one list of most scientifically inaccurate movies of all time. And still, the movie goes on and on about the science. The science, the science, the science. This is done so that the viewer associates global warming and all the other bogusness with the science. The movie leads the viewer to assume that scientists unanimously support global warming, but even that is false. Here's Dr. John Coleman, meteorologist and founder of the Weather Channel.
My next guest wants to sue Al Gore for fraud. He hopes a legal challenge will settle the global warming debate once and for all. He's John Coleman, and he founded the Weather Channel. So, John, why do you want to sue Al Gore?
Well, the deal is this, Greg. We have tried and tried and tried to get a debate on global warming with scientists on the other side. Al Gore or any of the scientists behind him over at the UN IPCC, we'd love to have a debate with them, but they say, oh no, the debate is over.
Yeah.
Well, now there are 30,000 of us. We have 30,000 scientists, 9,000 PhDs, who have signed up to debunk global warming. And they still won't listen to us.
Now, you say in a lot of your writing that global warming is a scam. Why do you think that?
Well, if you study all the papers of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, if you study everything their scientists have done, it all boils down to a claim that carbon dioxide, CO2 in the atmosphere, put there by our burning of fossil fuels, is going to turn the climate of Earth into an oven, and we're all going to bake and die. Well, that's sheer nonsense. We have been burning fossil fuels for 100 years. And what have we done so far? We might have raised the temperature by 1/10 of 1 degree, maybe.
Are you real concerned about this global warming?
I'm only concerned about the incredible frenzy and hype for something that's a total myth. And how many billions of dollars apparently our governments are going to spend of our tax dollars to combat something that isn't real. That has my attention, believe me. As a scientist, I know that global warming doesn't really exist at all.
Now, are you saying that there hasn't even been any warming of the...
Well, there's absolutely natural climate fluctuations. We have little ice ages, we have warm-ups. Historically, the Earth has vacillated through all of these. Solar cycles change dramatically. Ocean currents change. And all of that has a significant impact on climate.
Well, doesn't that bring us to the point that Mr. Gore makes and many others, that science has spoken? There is a universal consensus among scientists.
Well, if you look at the history of the IPCC, it was formed by people whose agendas were of question. And it was from people who had world government in mind.
Roland Emmerich's next movie of interest is 10,000 BC. This movie, too, has traces of the man who would be king, a chosen one with a mark on his body, who was prophesied to come and lead the people to victory and freedom. The movie is about a man named Delay, whose family and friends were captured by a group of raiders called the Four-Legged Demons. He sets out on a quest to reclaim his consort and people from the kidnappers. After a dangerous journey, he comes upon people who live under the same oppression of the very same villains responsible for the kidnapping of Delay's people. These people find a mark on him that designates him as a chosen one. Eventually, the warriors of the surrounding nations united under Delay's leadership. Delay would then lead a successful rebellion. This movie, similar to Stargate, hints that the pyramids are actually 10,000 years old or more. There is evidence, all outside the scope of this video, that the pyramids are much older than mainstream scholars suggest. Books like Fingerprints of the Gods detail the evidence for a much more ancient Egypt. For now, it's safe to say that 10,000 BC and Stargate have a lot in common, a mark found on a chosen one that will unite the people and lead them to freedom over their oppressors. Also, a last-minute revelation that's virtually identical.
He is not a god!
Yemyumae, Aturuti. Yemyumae.
And lastly, we have Roland Emmerich's latest Fear Fest, 2012. This movie has one purpose and one purpose only: fear. Similar to The Day After Tomorrow, the global effects are so sudden that they violate the laws of physics. In the movie, a recent large sun flare has produced a wave of quote-unquote mutated neutrinos. These neutrinos are penetrating the Earth and heating the Earth's core. After mere days, the Earth's liquid core separates from the surface, causing the Earth to simply cave in on itself. And, as its title suggests, all of these horrible events are set to occur at the end of the Mayan calendar, 2012. First, a neutrino is an electrically neutral particle, so a burst of them would not be released by the same conditions that would accompany a solar flare, which are magnetic in nature. Secondly, neutrinos rarely interact with matter and would usually pass through the Earth harmlessly. But if they did begin to interact with matter, they would have warmed up the atmosphere, surface, and oceans before heating the core, and all of this pales into comparison to the fact that the Mayans predicted nothing like this. The movie 2012 and the disasters therein are all based on the end of the Mayan calendar, or the perception thereof. The Mayan calendar, similar to ours, has months, weeks, and days that tick away like an odometer. In our system, we have 7 days to the week, approximately 4 weeks to the month, 12 months to a year, and from there, only the year continues to roll over. So, instead of getting to the 8th day in the week, we will roll over 1 week and begin the count again. Instead of getting to the 5th week of the month, we roll over 1 month, and instead of getting to the 13th month of the year, we roll over 1 year. The Mayans have a similar system, but instead is based on the number 20, with one exception. In the Mayan system, after 20 days, the Mayans roll over 1 minal. After 18 minals, the Mayans roll over 1 tune. So 1 tune equals 18 minals equals 360 days, or approximately 1 year. After 20 tunes, or 20 years, they roll over 1 katun. After 20 katuns, or 394 years, they roll over 1 baktun. And after 20 baktuns, they roll over 1 piktun. December 22nd, 2012 will be the first day of the 14th baktun. The Mayans believe that the gods made 3 creations before ours, and so the calendar has restarted 3 times. The most recent of those creations ended at the beginning of the 14th baktun. However, those were admittedly failed universes, unlike the successful one that we are said to occupy. And since there are 20 baktuns in 1 piktun, the calendar keeps going. So the only thing that ends on December 21st, 2012 is the end of a 394-year cycle. But this is not the end of time, simply the rolling over of the odometer. it will simply be the end of the 13th Bactun since creation, which started at 3114 BC, which means that 2012 is no more significant than September of 1618 or March of 2407. And as for Mayan prophecies of disaster, there is only one prophecy the Mayans ever made regarding 2012, the arrival of Balan Yukta from the sky. Balan Yukta is a Mayan god of war, creation, conflict, and the underworld. The only Mayan inscription regarding the end of the 13th Bactun, or 2012, is located in southern Mexico at a place dubbed Monument 6. The inscription reads, "He will descend from the sky." The details regarding the arrival have been eroded by time, but that's all the Mayans had to say regarding the so-called 2012 end date. No disasters, no floods, nothing except he will descend from the sky. Further, it's clear that the Mayans by no means considered 2012 to be the end of time, because there are other Mayan inscriptions relating to events that are set to occur in the year 4772. Why would the Mayans talk about events occurring at the end of the 20th Bactun, the year 4772, if the calendar stops at the end of the 13th Bactun? So maybe the reason those History Channel scholars simply tell you what the Mayans said would happen on 2012 without quoting the Mayans themselves is that they don't have the option to. In the history of archaeology, only a single Mayan prediction regarding 2012 exists, the arrival of Balan Yukta from Monument 6. Next we have writer and producer Terry Rossio and writer Ted Elliott. These two have worked as a pair on many hit movies. Some of the movies this pair has collaborated on are Aladdin, The Road to El Dorado, The Mask of Zorro, Shrek, National Treasure, The Book of Secrets, and all of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. They even worked together with Roland Emmerich on his film Godzilla. Didn't help much. This pair's Man Who Would Be King retelling is The Road to El Dorado. The Road to El Dorado is about two Spaniards named Michael and Tulio. At the beginning of the movie, they come to own a map to El Dorado, the lost city of gold. They end up as castaways, still in possession of the map. They hatch a plan to loot El Dorado of its gold, so they follow the map and eventually find El Dorado. Upon arrival, they are mistaken for gods, and just like the Man Who Would Be King, their arrival had been prophesied. A false miracle, the apparent halting of a volcano, seals the deal. They become the immediate rulers of El Dorado. Later, however, Michael is seen bleeding, and it becomes apparent to the high priest that he is only a man and not a god. By the end, the two had separate plans. One intended on remaining with the primitive people as ruler, while the other, Tulio, intended on going home with his half of the gold. But before Tulio leaves, an old enemy catches up with them. During the panic of escape, the pair watch all their treasure wasted. The Road to El Dorado, even more than Stargate, has scenes that appear to deliberately draw from The Man Who Would Be King. Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio also wrote the stories for the Pirates of the Caribbean. In Part 2, Dead Man's Chest, Jack Sparrow, the central character of the movie series, has arrived by boat to a primitive island where he has been mistaken for a god. The natives decide to paint eyes on his face, symbolizing his divinity. Just another retelling, it appears. Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio also wrote National Treasure 2, The Book of Secrets. The first National Treasure movie is loaded with blatant Illuminati symbolism, but the second National Treasure movie is more subtle. And similar to Elliott's and Rossio's The Road to El Dorado, once again, the whole movie revolves around the location and plundering of the lost City of Gold. The movie depicts the City of Gold almost exactly as it was depicted in The Road to El Dorado. Next, we have George Lucas, creator of the Star Wars saga. Star Wars, most notably Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, appears to be yet another retelling of The Man Who Would Be King. Han Solo from Star Wars and Danny from The Man Who Would Be King have tons in common. Both smugglers, have a brainy best friend, and many more. Even Darth Vader, who is probably film history's most infamous villain, appears to be based on Jesus Christ. But that's not the end of his storytelling. Apparently, Lucas's Jedi isn't Lucas's at all. The Jedi, or the Jedi, were a secretive group of magicians in ancient Egypt. What set the Jedi, or the Jedi priest, apart from other magicians is that their bodies had been transformed. The uraeus, the serpent-adorned headpiece that was often seen on Egyptian pharaohs and gods, was a symbol of those who had undergone this ritual and became Jedis. The serpent was placed over the forehead because the forehead was the location of the third eye. The serpent was used because it symbolized those who had their kundalini, or inner serpent, raised from the base of their spine up through the chakras and placed into the foreheads. Djed means spinal column. Initiation to the Jedi Order was physically demanding, and, like Luke Skywalker discovered, often involved exercises and other routines that had nothing to do with spiritual growth. But if a Jedi student showed promise and perseverance, he was initiated into the Order of the Jedi. In this rite, the initiate would be led blindfold into the very center of the Pyramid of Giza, where they would lay into a sarcophagus, which is like a giant coffin. From there, while clinically dead, certain incantations are said over the coffin. 3 days later, the person would be reborn as a Jedi, with abilities that we would associate with powerful magicians. They experience the world through the eyes and abilities of a spirit, yet still have flesh. They could create objects at will, move objects from afar, move at incredible speeds, have extrasensory perception, telepathy, the ability to see spirits, and also complete control of their astral bodies, allowing them to tear their soul away from its fleshly encasing and send their astral bodies to distant places in the universe. Today, this ritual of the body transformation is reenacted by the Masons and Skull and Bones. In fact, you've seen it before. When someone is initiated into the 33rd degree of Freemasonry, they are blindfolded and lowered into a pyramid. After the initiate has taken the oath, his mask is removed and he quote-unquote receives the light. But this is not just a figurative light of knowledge, but reborn in literal light. The film From Hell, starring Johnny Depp, is about an investigator who smokes opium to receive visions of the future and past. Against him is a series of murders perpetrated and concealed by the Freemasons, who occupy all the significant seats of power in 19th century London. The movie depicts a reenactment of this most secretive ritual.
Let the brother receive the light.
At Yale University's Skull and Bones, initiates are placed into a coffin where they reveal their deepest secrets and are afterwards told that they are reborn as bonesmen. They are also told that they are now superior to Earth's human population and use war and suffering to control the planet. Many terms that I believe are really just alternative names of this transformation and its recipients are the reborn, the black flame, those who have risen, the resurrected, assuming God form, self-deification, the black pilgrimage, the oath, the dragon body, the initiated, the vampire, the warlock, the witch, the druid, and of course, the Jedi. This conversion usually happens within large structures like pyramids and on ley lines. The book The Fingerprints of the Gods not only speaks of a more ancient Egypt, but how the pyramids were used to turn men into gods. The Masons and the Illuminati have long used the phoenix in their symbolism. This is because the phoenix is a symbol of death and rebirth. In 1993's Warlock, the Armageddon, this ritual is blatantly revealed as the main character, Kenny Travis, is deliberately killed by his father so that he may be brought back to life possessing magical powers.
2 days ago, my dad shot me. Dead. And then he brought me back to life, so now I'm like this walking zombie.
Like the phoenix rising from the ashes, the warrior rises from his own death.
Then, his girlfriend, and daughter of the town preacher, insist on undergoing the same ritual so that she may fight at his side with similar abilities.
I do. I have to be reborn.
There's only one way.
I know. Daddy, you have to help me.
One book that mentions the Jedi and the many names they've had throughout the centuries is called The Return of the Serpents of Wisdom. The book's main focus is the reverence for serpents that exists in each human culture, and how the gods have always been associated with the serpent. Mankind's relationship with the reptile is indeed a strange one. Humans have a natural aversion to reptiles, and yet humans have, since ancient times, venerated the serpent and associated it with wisdom, godly powers, and the gods themselves. Even Jesus, said to be as wise as serpents, while every other reference of the serpent in the Bible was unanimously negative. The Return of the Serpents of Wisdom is pretty new agey, so be careful, but the book's cover is quite revealing. You have a body made of fire, receiving energy from two all-seeing eyes inside of pyramids, hovering above with the help of what appears to be the wings of the phoenix. Inside of the transformed man, the caduceus, or twin serpents. A picture truly is worth 1,000 words. But here's another picture that's worth 1,000 words. It's a card from Steve Jackson's card game, Illuminati, the Game of Conspiracy. The card's name is Unmasked, and the caption below reads, "There is a secret of our cabal that even you of the 12th Circle have not known until now." Now, to understand the magnitude of this card, you need a bit of context. Take a look at some of the other cards in Steve Jackson's game. This card game, whose final goal is world domination, was created by an admitted magician named Steve Jackson. In 1990, Steve Jackson's company was raided by the Secret Service, and 3 years later, he would create a website hosting company called Illuminati Online. In 1995, the card game was released, and later in 1999, George Bush's presidential campaign website was hosted by Steve Jackson's Illuminati Online. The game has hundreds of cards like this, and now that you have a taste of what those other cards must look like, ask yourself why Steve Jackson has a card for every person, method, technology, and organization the Illuminati have ever used, letting it all hang out with pyramids, all-seeing eyes, and 666 everywhere. And yet this card means seemingly nothing, and yet claims to show one of their cabal's most deepest secrets. That's because it does, my friends. So much so that even in Steve Jackson's shameless card game, he remains vague, so that only those who should know the card's meaning do know the card's meaning. Another movie that talks about the Jedi, and even in the correct context, is The Men Who Stare at Goats. This movie begins with the line, "There's more truth to this movie than you think," and it's right. The movie is about a journalist who picks up the scent of a story involving a disbanded group of psychic warriors who once worked for the army. He eventually comes to learn that the army did in fact attempt to create a unit of psychic soldiers who were capable of doing things such as using telepathy to stop the heart of a goat. This group, called the New Earth Army, was formed under what the military would call Project Jedi, and the individual soldiers were known as Jedi Warriors. According to the movie, a Jedi warrior has super abilities, such as being able to see with a blindfold, seeing extremely distant or hidden objects, and could even walk through walls.
In the 80s, I was trained at Fort Bragg under a secret initiative, codenamed Project Jedi. The objective of the project was to create super soldiers.
Super soldier?
A Jedi warrior. He'd know where all the lights were. He could walk through a room, he could tell you how many power outlets there were. It's the Anya chakra, the third eye, the symbol of the Jedi.
The movie got something else right, too. The eye in the pyramid truly is the symbol of the Jedi. The 2009 film, The Men Who Stare at Goats, is actually based on a 2003 documentary with the same name. The 2003 documentary, a creation of John Ronson and John Sargent, was itself based on a book written by John Ronson. The documentary details the Army's ambitions to create soldiers with superpowers back in the 1980s. Allegedly, the Army was training soldiers taken from Special Forces squads and teaching them to do things like become invisible, mind reading, moving at incredible speeds, walking through walls, mind control, and astral projection. Eventually, the Army's aspirations would change into the use of mental powers to stop the hearts of goats. While the goat was under close observation, subjects would attempt to project damage into the goats simply by staring at them. These experiments were conducted at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, in a building dubbed Goat Lab. It is said that after 9/11, the Army resumed Project Jedi and resumed experiments involving injuring goats from afar. As stated earlier, Jedis have gone by many names throughout the centuries. A commonly known name for them is vampires. Vampires are beings that have undergone the irreversible ritual of transformation. They have the ability to astral project themselves at will. Their abilities are made possible by the reaching out, so to speak, of their astral bodies. They are capable of seeing spirits and tearing out of their fleshly casing and sending their astral bodies to distant places while their material body lies idle on the floor. This concept is employed in movies like The Matrix. In The Matrix, those who have been irreversibly unplugged return to the computer-generated matrix by plugging in and traveling through that digital world while their material body lies idle in the real world. When plugged into the matrix, those who have been unplugged exhibit incredible strength and abilities. That brings us to Avatar. Avatar was written and directed by James Cameron. James Cameron wrote and directed movies such as Terminator 1 through 3, Titanic, Strange Days, The Abyss, and Aliens. In Avatar, people operate grown-from-scratch bodies called avatars remotely, while their real body lies idle in a large capsule. These avatar bodies are considerably stronger than human bodies and are capable of sensing the world in all the same ways. The movie is about a guy named Jake Sully and takes place in the year 2154. Jake is a handicapped ex-Marine now working for the RDA Corporation. Jake, and many others in the employ of the RDA Corporation, have traveled from Earth to Pandora, which is a moon of a distant planet. The corporation intends on mining a rare and extremely valuable mineral found on Pandora called unobtainium. The natives of Pandora are a primitive, blue-colored people called the Na'vi. The Na'vi have no intention of allowing outsiders to mine their land, and have firmly established their willingness to resist, even with primitive weapons. So Jake was selected to operate an avatar body, which is exactly like the bodies of Pandora's natives, and infiltrate their community. His mission was to gain information regarding their land, defenses, and most importantly, their sacred tree, which stands directly above a huge deposit of unobtainium. Upon arrival, he is initially met with hostility, but the pure spirits released by the sacred tree shine their favor on Jake, and provide the first indication that he had been chosen. The hostility he was initially met with turns into acceptance, and slowly, Jake begins to feel affection for the natives. Further, he is growing increasingly close to Natiri, who is the daughter of the clan leader. After telling the Na'vi that he had been sent to infiltrate them, Jake once again finds himself an outcast. But Jake still wants to help the Na'vi fight the RDA Corporation, so he sets out to do something that no native has done in generations: ride and control a dragging-looking animal the natives call the Last Shadow. After succeeding, he arrives with the beast and impresses them enough to not only regain acceptance, but become leader. He sets out to unite all the neighboring tribes under his leadership, and they accept his leadership. Jake, with his army of natives, defeats the RDA Corporation and sends his surviving employees home. Instead of returning home, Jake decides to stay with the primitive people and take the local, Natiri, for a wife. At the end, he undergoes permanent body transformation into the body of a Navi. Even the movie's title alludes to who Jake really is. The word avatar has two definitions. The first is a human incarnation or embodiment of a god. The second definition is a virtual identity. This story sounds a bit like The Man Who Would Be King. A guy arrives to a primitive land with a con up his sleeve so that he may steal its valuable metals. But slowly, he comes to appreciate the natives and forgets about his original plan to get the gold and run. Ultimately, he becomes leader and decides to stay and take a wife. But what Avatar really sounds like is Pocahontas. In Pocahontas, privateers of the Virginia Company are arriving to the east coast of America from England in search of gold. John Smith, the Jake Sully of Pocahontas, is one of those privateers. On his first scouting mission, he's spotted by a native Indian girl who had wandered away from her village nearby. The girl so happens to be the daughter of the chief. They begin a rather forbidden relationship, and soon John's relationship with his gold-hungry leader sours. He begins to play the role of a negotiator and succeeds in preventing war between the natives and the British privateers. Jake Sully from Avatar and John Smith from Pocahontas have a little too much in common. Both arrive to a primitive land with other privateers in search for a valuable metal. Both go off alone and are first spotted by the nature-freak daughter of the local chief. In Avatar, it's the Tree of Souls that shines its favor on Jake, while Grandmother Willow from Pocahontas fancies John Smith. Both would eventually be captured. Both Pocahontas and Natiri from Avatar are being pressured to marry a skilled and humorless warrior for which they have no desire. Both pairs fall in love, and finally, both Jake Sully and John Smith would play the role of negotiators for peace. Only the ending is different. Another story of interest, written by James Cameron, is Strange Days. Strange Days is a seriously underrated movie. Strange Days was released in 1995 and takes place at the very end of the year 1999. The movie depicts an America in a state of martial law, where the economy has collapsed and the cops are as bad as the criminals. The film depicts a technology called squid. After being placed on the head, an apparatus containing squid receptors is capable of recording everything that its wearer is experiencing. These memories are recorded onto a disc, and by using the same apparatus, those memories can be replayed and experienced by anyone at any time. In the movie, the main character, a former cop named Lenny, is a black market dealer of electronically recorded memories. From an unknown source, he begins receiving first-person memory recordings of a series of murders. The story is well written and has a nice twist at the end. Squid, or superconducting quantum interference device, is a real technology. A squid is a small electronic component that detects extremely small magnetic fields. Most of the squid's real-world applications have yet to be discovered, but already this device has found scientific application. It turns out that biological organisms create weak magnetic fields, which makes the squid perfect for monitoring neural activity, which is electric in nature. Also, because of its sensitivity, squid can be used in MRI machines that don't have to expose the body to the powerful magnetic field that current MRI machines use. James Cameron also wrote the first 3 Terminator films and directed the first 2. The Terminator series certainly has a chosen one feel to it. The entire series of movies essentially chronicles the life of John Connor. John Connor is the future leader of the human race in our war with the machines. In this case, James Cameron and many others used machines to symbolize demons, or those who had undergone transformation. This works out well for 2 reasons. First, the incredible strength that robots can be depicted with, and secondly, because of the more computer-like nature of demons. Most of us are familiar with the theme of a devilish version of oneself sitting on one shoulder while their angelic copy is sitting on the other. But there's a thread of truth to this. Each person is assigned both a demon counterpart and an angelic counterpart. The demon counterpart whispers dark thoughts into the mind, encouraging it to do evil, while the angelic counterpart, or guardian angel, encourages you to do righteous things and protects you from things unseen. A movie that uses this concept of a demon counterpart is The Golden Compass.
There are many universes and many Earths parallel to each other. Worlds like yours, where people's souls live inside their bodies, and worlds like mine, where they walk beside us as animal spirits we call demons.
In The Golden Compass, everyone walks around with their demon counterpart, which takes the form of an animal that stays at their side. The movie includes a universe with multiple dimensions, multiple copies of the planet Earth, and a mysterious element called dust, mysterious to the point of comedy. This dust, which is flowing from another universe, is entering into people by using their demons as an entry point. The Magisterium, the antagonist of the film, claim that this dust is making people act badly, and so begins researching a procedure to cut people's demons away. One of the Magisterium's success stories, shown here, had his demon removed, and now he just sits in a corner.
Have a demon.
Bats. Where's my Retta? Have you seen her?
It's pretty clear that the movie was meant to instill in the minds of children positive connotations to demons. Surrogates is another movie that illustrates the avatar body concept, but uses machine symbolism instead. The screenplay for Surrogates was written by yet another screenwrite duo, Michael Ferris and John Brancato. This pair, like Terry Rossio and Ted Elliott, have collaborated on a number of projects, including Terminator 3 and 4, Catwoman, and The Net. In Surrogates, most people live their daily lives using a machine body called a surrogate, while their real body is at home, lying idle in a chair. The surrogates appear to use a squid-like system, like depicted in Strange Days, to communicate to the human host. These surrogate bodies are much stronger than their fleshly counterparts, and because no one would choose an ugly body, all surrogates are good-looking. The film does drop a few hints relating to what is actually happening here. Meatbags, as they are called, are people who walk around in the flesh, rather than living their daily lives in a surrogate body. But when the term is used, it sounds more like a derogatory reference to a separate race, the race of the meatbags. Water, or being thrown in water, is often symbolic for death, and because body transformation requires clinical death, coming out of the water is symbolic for undergoing transformation, or coming back from the dead. Often, when a movie character rises out of the water, or the abyss, the character rises up a little different than they went in. Another Michael Ferris, John Brancato flick is The Very Unfortunate Catwoman. The movie is awful beyond reckoning, but in it we see the standard use of water symbolism.
It all started on the day that I died. If there had been an obituary, it would have described the unremarkable life of an unremarkable woman.
You died, but you were reborn.
In Catwoman, Halle Berry gets killed by agents of the company she works for. She finds herself floating, dead in the water. A special, mystical cat comes by and breathes new life into her, and she comes back to life. Upon arising out of the water, she discovers that she's been endowed with incredible speed, strength, senses, and is now subject to an animalistic alter ego. The movie associates Catwoman with the Egyptian goddess Bast. She of course goes on to avenge her own death and set the wrong things right. But the award for the most barefaced use of water symbolism for body transformation goes to Constantine. Constantine is about a demon hunter played by Keanu Reeves. In this scene, Angela is trying to convince Constantine to give her psychic powers and second sight. He warns her that this request is irreversible and that she will forever see spirits, and they will see her. He goes about putting her in a tub of water and telling her that she must be completely submerged for her to be transformed. When she asks how long she'll be underwater, his reply is, as long as it takes. The reason is that you have to be clinically dead before you are transformed.
I need to see what she saw.
You do this, there's no turning back. You see them. They see you. Lie down.
What do you mean, lie down?
You have to be fully submerged.
For how long?
As long as it takes.
After rising out of the water, her senses are so heightened that they immediately begin leading her around. She also finds herself instantly illuminated, now understanding all of the mysteries of her previous life. In fact, water is used more than once in the movie to describe death and body transformation. Sometimes, when the storyline demands, the character will be arriving by ship from the sea instead of rising out of the water. This brings us to the stories of David S. Goyer. David Goyer has written the story for movies such as The Puppet Masters, Blade 1 through 3, Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, The Unborn, and contributed to Jumper. I have already discussed symbolism in Batman in previous documentaries. I've also reviewed symbolism in David Goyer's Blade series, so I'll keep it short by pointing out this single, relevant scene from Blade Trinity. In this scene, Dagon, or Dragula, is shown disappearing from the world. In the movie, Dagon is described as having wrought murder and suffering upon the world for ages, and then suddenly vanishes. Water symbolism is used to describe what was actually his death. Another movie David Goyer was involved in was Jumper. Jumper is about a guy named David Rice, who finds out that he has the ability to teleport himself across vast distances simply by imagining his intended destination. He first discovered that he had these powers the day he fell into a partially frozen lake. The intense fear brought on by the prospect of drowning in ice-cold water triggered his first teleport. After that, he runs or teleports away from home, leaving all those who knew him believing that he had died in the frozen lake. He goes on a crime spree, eventually meeting up with another teleporter. Then there's a Luke Skywalker moment where he finds out that his mother is a big cheese in a group that hunts jumpers just like him. What's important here is the use of water symbolism, going underwater and coming out with extra abilities. In the movie, the character doesn't actually die, but the writers drop hints about what has actually happened by having all the townspeople thinking that David had died in the lake. Another David Goyer movie is The Crow, City of Angels. The Crow, City of Angels is about a guy named Ash, who along with his son are murdered for witnessing a crime. Both are thrown into the water, but while there, Ash comes back to life and rises out of the water with incredible strength, speed, and a body that's impossible to kill. After a brief freakout caused by finding out that he had been killed, he goes on to avenge his own death by killing one criminal after another, working his way up to the man ultimately responsible for his and his son's death. Finally, you have David Goyer's Unborn. The Unborn contains the standard symbolism you'd expect from any insider story. Similar to The Man Who Would Be King and Stargate, the Unborn includes a charm adorned with the all-seeing eye that was given for a source of protection. This is known as the Eye of Horus. The Eye of Horus, or the Wadjet, is an Egyptian symbol of protection. The Wadjet was commonly associated with the Egyptian goddesses Bast, Hathor, and Sekhmet. Sekhmet, who is also known as the Eye of Ra, was typically spoke of as an ultimate weapon. In Hollywood Insider's Full Disclosure, I spoke of Asmodeus, the highly intelligent villain in purple who is associated with the Pyramid, the All-Seeing Eye, and betrays those he's working with. Oftentimes, this villain or villainous organization is associated with not only the colors purple, but purple and red. This color combination is from the Bible and is a reference to the Whore of Babylon. The Whore of Babylon is a character or location in the Bible who is associated with black magic, economics, and the trafficking of souls. A Bible verse in reference to the Whore of Babylon from Revelation chapter 17 verse 4 states, "And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication." The verse states that this entity is associated with the colors purple and scarlet. Scarlet is red with a slight hint of orange. The Hollywood Insider series has reviewed only a few movies relative to how many are out there, and still, the color combination purple and scarlet appear several times. Here are the instances of purple and red from movies covered by this series. In The Man Who Would Be King, Danny's wife wears purple and red. Homer and the rest of his stonecutters / Freemasons are decked out in purple and red. Ra, the sun god from Stargate, wears purple and red. Michael, while impersonating a god, has purple and red on. In Batman, both Jack Nicholson's Joker and Heath Ledger's Joker wear purple on the outside, red on the inside. In 10,000 BC, the main villain wears purple and red. In Gabriel, when Archangel Gabriel enters the headquarters of the villains, the background alternates between purple and red. In The Crow, City of Angels, virtually the same thing, with an all-seeing eye to boot. In Pocahontas, the villain wears, you guessed it. Still don't believe me? That's okay. This TV show, which played on Cartoon Network, illustrates my point better than all of that anyway. This is Minority, which was part of Cartoon Network's Adult Swim lineup of 2005. The show contains loads of racist jokes that are actually pretty funny, and revolves around a group of minority superheroes. There's a Jew, a black guy, a Mexican, an Indian, and a Chinese Charles Xavier.
Es la única manera. ¡Sacar que... ¡Viva la raza!
You go in, distract club members with break dancing.
That's done, baby.
Guy.
Where the party at? I heard there was a party up in here. Yeah. Check this out.
The whole show reminds you of an animated version of the Illuminati card game. The villain of the show, a guy called the White Shadow, has a pyramid for a head with a single eye, and runs a criminal organization from atop a phallic tower.
Nothing like bathing in tears after a hard day of evilness. How many times are we going to use snakes to try to kill non-stop? Anyone? Anyone? I have to say, in my professional opinion, money-wise, bang for the buck-wise, snakes have to absolutely be the worst way to kill people.
Great. What's more is that him, his lair, and all his goons are dressed in purple and red. Coincidence, I'm sure. And to give you a little peek into this guy's personality, this episode says it all. In this episode, the White Shadow successfully dispatched the Minority and had the heroes captive on a far-off planet. But in their absence, the White Shadow becomes bored, so he uses his own spaceship to rescue his enemies, just so he'll have someone to fight.
Get in.
I'm a Chinese. You're not liking me, remember?
Minority team, get in the freaking ship now.
Another reoccurring character is the Lady in Red. The Lady in Red has always represented an infinitely alluring seductress. Her name is Venus. Her general characteristics are as follows. May show an act of loyalty to the main character, and may have been placed in his way just to seduce and manipulate him. Typically depicted as a criminal, extremely vain, a girl that likes money, had multiple marriages, at some point may go bad, and finally, either working for a villain or dating one. Even though it has no value regarding Illuminati symbolism, the movie The Woman in Red is still worth mentioning. The Woman in Red is about a loser, played by Gene Wilder, who becomes infatuated with the woman in red. And you know he's a loser because his 40-year-old friends act like 17-year-olds, and his wife is cheating on him with this guy. In the movie, the Woman in Red has no agenda to seduce Gene Wilder, but since these two sleep together by the end, the logical mind is forced to conclude that the movie excluded that part, and that there was indeed some horrible scheme to seduce Mr. Wilder. Because I mean, come on. This cartoonishly lopsided Lady in Red matchup is reminiscent of other cartoonishly lopsided Lady in Red matchups like Roger Rabbit and Jessica Rabbit, or how about Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe? And, as it turns out, the Woman in Red is dating a pretty scary guy. I only bring up the movie to point out the Lady in Red character, and her typical role as the ultimate seductress. A more relevant example of the typical Lady in Red character can be found in the new Sherlock Holmes movie. In the movie, a character named Irene Adler, first seen in a red dress, has been charged with the task of seducing Sherlock Holmes. This job was bestowed upon her by the ultimate villain in what is most likely the next Sherlock Holmes movie. She is almost a prototypical Lady in Red. She shows an act of loyalty to the main character, was sent to seduce him, described as a criminal with multiple marriages, and was working for a villainous figure. At the beginning of Sherlock Holmes, Detective Holmes is arriving to a prison where a prisoner, Lord Blackwood, the movie's antagonist, is about to be executed. Upon arriving to Lord Blackwood's cell, he finds Blackwood reading a passage from the Bible.
Blasphemy. They worship the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? The beast which I saw was like unto a leopard.
The passage Lord Blackwood is reading from is from the Book of Revelation, and gives us our first clue as to the identity of the two characters currently on screen. This part of the Bible describes two beasts that will arrive at the end times. The first is a beast which will rise out of the sea. Afterwards, a second beast rises out of the earth. Because both beasts will be worshipped, what is essentially being described here are two antichrists. The second beast, the beast of the earth, uses a series of false miracles to make the entire world worship both beasts. The first beast, Sherlock Holmes, would end up being a hero for neutralizing Blackwood twice, and the second beast, Lord Blackwood, along with what is obviously the Freemasons, would attempt to use a series of false miracles to convince others that he had divine power. As the movie comes to a close, it becomes clear that Blackwood actually wanted an alliance with Sherlock Holmes. After his resurrection, Blackwood perpetrates a series of murders that leaves Sherlock Holmes baffled, so the detective turns to more unorthodox means to solve the case. He goes about doing a ritual that will give him insights that will help him solve the case, and by the next morning, he finds himself illuminated to not only the nature of the case, but things involving ancient history as well. There are in fact spells and rituals that can give one insights to mysteries or dilemmas that they face. The practitioner will find themselves flooded with images and concepts related to the question they've asked. Although their predictions aren't perfect, some demons can calculate the odds of a certain event occurring.
The fraternity, who silently control the empire, share the belief with the kings, pharaohs, and emperors of old that the Sphinx was a door to another dimension, a gateway to immeasurable power. It's made up of 4 parts: the foot of a lion, the tail of an ox, the wings of an eagle, and the head of a man.
The 4 animals spoke of in the previous scene, the lion, the ox, the man, and the eagle, is once again from the Bible. Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 10 describes 4 living beings, each looking like one of the aforementioned animals. And in Revelation chapter 4, verse 7, nearly the exact animals are mentioned again. Sherlock Holmes is clearly a loaded retelling. Well friends, I hope you found this video eye-opening. I hope you have a better understanding of how the Illuminati retell their traditions in movies and the symbolism used to convey these retellings. I urge you to watch some of the movies I've reviewed here with a bit more open eyes. I also urge you to watch this documentary's predecessor, Hollywood Insider's Full Disclosure, for the details I've skipped in this video. I've went through great pains to bring you this documentary series and teach you what I know about the Illuminati, and all I ask in return is that you inform others what you know. If not this sector of truth, symbolism in movies, then some other sector of truth. Everything that ever was started in the mind of one person, and sometimes that one person is you. So, keep learning, but more importantly, keep teaching. That's it from me. Take care, friends, and good luck.